So, I've been releasing some shorts going over character designs for RWBY. It's been great, but I've noticed a lot of people don't seem to know what fairy tales and other inspirations all of the characters are based off of. Now, seeing fairy tales being reimagined is literally one of my all-time favorite things ever. I love it with Ever After High, I love it with Shrek, I even love it with Hoodwinked. So knowing each character in RWBY is based off of a classic fairy tale or legend was one of the biggest selling points for me when it was first coming out. I would do a ton of research to figure out what everyone was based off of, but it never crossed my mind that other people might not be as obsessive with finding out this information as I am, especially now that the show is 9 seasons deep and there are well over 100 characters, lots of who have fairy tale inspirations that are pretty impossible to tell at a glance. So I figure I'll put all that research to good use and try to make a comprehensive list of everyone's fairy tale inspirations, every character from all 9 current volumes of RWBY. But not the supplemental material. I think that would be its own separate video, and I get the feeling this video might already be really long. Of course, even though I'm going to try to be as thorough as possible, I still might end up missing something here or there. So if there's anything you know about that I didn't mention, please leave it in the comments. I'd love to see it. Let's not waste any more time. Let's dive right in. First, obviously, Ruby Rose is Red Riding Hood. The classic red cape is a pretty big giveaway, and her red-themed name plays into that idea too. Torchwick's nickname for her is another obvious nod to Red Riding Hood.
Oh, hello, Red!
If you want revenge, take it up with Little Red.
Ruby's affinity for cookies is also a reference to the classic fairy tale. It's often described that Red Riding Hood is taking a basket of sweets to her grandmother, and Ruby has interpreted that idea into Ruby's love for cookies. Personally, I always thought Red was bringing muffins, but whatever, cookies are fine too, I guess. The Beowulfs Ruby fights in the Red trailer also seem to be referencing the idea of the big bad wolf, though they're named after the epic poem Beowulf, though it is spelled differently. Fun fact, did you know the person who translated the poem into modern English was J.R.R. Tolkien, the author of Lord of the Rings? Beowulfs don't reference anything about the poem. It's clear they just liked the wolf-esque name, and I can't blame them. It is a cool name for a wolf monster. Aside from the Beowulfs, there hasn't really been a big bad wolf character proper in the show. Some people thought that the Hound is meant to be Ruby's big bad wolf. The man inside the wolf might even be a reference to how, in the story, the wolf ate Red's grandmother. But I've also seen it argued that the wolf references the fox in the Hound, because the man inside the Hound seems to be a fox faunus, making it instead the fox in the Hound. However, the Fox and the Hound already have fairy tale allusions in RWBY. Fox Alistair and his uncle Copper, which were the names of the characters from the original story. Fox and Copper seem to be only referencing the story with their names, though. Another potential fairy tale reference the Hound might be alluding to is the Black Dog. It's an old British folklore about a dog that had shape-shifting abilities, and was even called the Church Grim. None of these fairy tales have been confirmed by the writers, though, so it's all technically still up in the air, but I personally think the Black Dog is the best fit. Back to Red Riding Hood, the other characters from the classic story also don't seem to make a specific appearance in the show. The huntsman who kills the wolf isn't a character in RWBY, rather the title of Huntsman and Huntress seems to be alluding to that concept instead. And there's no grandmother specifically either, but it could be said that Maria takes on the role of representing Red Riding Hood's grandmother. Maria becomes a mentor figure for RWBY, and the two become much closer to each other, so I personally think this checks out. Maria, more specifically, is referencing the character the Grim Reaper, a character who became a popularized representation for death after an illustration was published during the Black Plague, depicting them as a skeleton wielding a large scythe to reap the souls, like how farmers would reap crop. By the way, have you seen a scythe actually being used for reaping crops? It's way more soothing than you might think, given the grisly reputation scythes have gotten thanks to this personification of death. Maria's skull mask she wore when she was younger clearly references that classic Grim Reaper skeleton, along with her scythes that are even named Life and Death. But also, the decoration on her skull and her Hispanic name allude to the idea of Dia de los Muertos. I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing it wrong, I can't roll my R's. I'm doing the best I can. Reminiscent of what we in English call sugar skulls, or more commonly known in Spanish as calavera, which is even Maria's last name. Moving on, let's talk about Weiss. Weiss Schnee is German that literally translates to white and snow. She's Snow White. And the German name is even hinting to the idea that Snow White is claimed to originate in Germany. Or at least the popular version of it comes from Germany. The iconic poisoned apple isn't in the show proper, though she does have a very tiny apple necklace in volumes 1 through 3. Instead, a lot of those apple, or more specifically the glass coffin, are much more heavily referenced in Ice Queendom. Weiss also has several songs that include the words mirror mirror, alluding to the classic line from the animated movie, except it actually isn't. That is a common misquote of the line. Instead, the evil queen actually says the words magic mirror.
Magic mirror on the wall.
Weiss is also the heiress to the Schnee Dust Company, being the in-universe allusion to her princess status in the fairy tale.
I said I was sorry, princess. It's Eris, actually.
One last one that I love, but I never see anyone talking about. Weiss loves animals. She instantly fawns over Zwei, and Snow White classically was always surrounded by small woodland creatures. Looking at other characters from Snow White, there doesn't seem to be a specific character referencing the evil queen. You could make an argument that Willow, Weiss's mother, could be filling that role, but there's nothing specific confirming that idea or not. I mean, she is bad and an abusive alcoholic, so I guess she's pretty evil. But we do have Klein, representing all 7 of the dwarves. His name, Klein Sybin, also literally translates to small 7. Klein has several different personalities, signified by the color of his eyes, and each different personality references a classic personality trait from the animated Disney version of Snow White. Red is grumpy, blue is sneezy, yellow is happy, pink is bashful, green is dopey, purple is sleepy, and brown is Doc. Next is Blake, who there seems to be some confusion around. Blake references Beauty from Beauty and the Beast. She's apparently very pretty in universe, given how she's had 4 different characters openly show attraction towards her. She loves to read, which is referencing Belle's characterization from the Disney movie. Even this candelabra she's sitting next to in volume 1 is meant to reference Lumiere, according to the writer commentary of the volume. But she is not also the Beast. That is a common idea that since she's a faunus, she is also alluding to the idea of the Beast, and I don't blame you if you want to think of it that way, but very clearly Adam is the Beast. In the story, the Beast's name is Adam. Even in the Disney movie, look it up. Adam's last name, Taurus, is referencing the word bull, like his bull horns. In the story, there are many words describing the way the beast looks, including the horns of a buffalo, which is different from a bull, but Taurus was probably just a cooler sounding name they decided on. Adam's emblem depicting a rose and his weapon named Wilt allude to the idea of the dying rose representing the beast's curse. Some people say Adam is also referencing Gaston, and yeah, I guess maybe. They're both full of themselves assholes, but more clearly Adam is actually the Beast. Moving on to Yang. Yang is Goldilocks. She has long, beautiful gold hair, and she's very protective over keeping her hair long and beautiful. The illusion kind of begins and ends there, though. She doesn't make a habit of breaking into people's houses to find out which porridge is just right. Shay, this guy. His name is Shay D. Man. Shay references the classic line from the fairy tale.
Not too lean. You're
just right.
Even this gas station they're in during the scene is called the Just Right. We could argue she broke into Junior's club in volume 2, and Junior is even the baby bear to Yang's Goldilocks. Junior Shang, his real name, He Shang, is the Chinese word for black bear, and Junior is typically a name given to a son who shares the name of his father. The DJ in the club even wears a bear mask. There's never been a mention of someone who could be Father Bear, but in the DC comics there was a woman who seemed to be Mama Bear. Yang also shows off her weapons for the first time against 2 Ursa, who could be alluding to the bear theme of her fairy tale. Ursa and the larger Ursa Major are clearly named after the constellations Ursa Major and Ursa Minor. Ursa is just the Latin word for bear. Big Bear, Little Bear. So that seems to be it for Team RWBY. Let's bounce over to Juniper. All of Team Juniper are characters that dressed up or transformed into the opposite gender, including Oscar, who becomes the honorary 4th member of the team after Pyrrha dies. His last name is Pine. Guys, we don't need to call them Team Junior. They can still be Team Juniper. I don't know why no one else does this. It's Juniper, guys. Jeanne Arc is Joan of Arc, a woman who disguised herself as a man to fight for the French Revolution. She's said to have a connection with God, and you could make the argument that Jean's aura amp semblance is a reference to that. His semblance lets you heal, and God powers are often associated with the act of healing. When Joan was arrested, legend has it that a man named Henry Buford was there to interrogate her, though actual reports confirm that he wasn't actually there, but the legend says he oversaw the execution of Joan of Arc. Henry Buford was the Cardinal of Winchester, and he's clearly Cardin Winchester's illusion. Not only does Cardin's name make it obvious alongside his role of bullying Jean in Volume 1, but also Cardin's weapon is called the Executioner. His scroll ID references Buford, and after Henry was done being a cardinal, he became a bishop, and Cardin and his team chose the black bishop pieces during orientation.
4 of you retrieved the black bishop pieces.
The rest of Team Cardinal, Dove, Sky, and Lark are just named after other birds to reference the cardinal in the Cardinal of Winchester, even though that cardinal in question isn't actually about a bird, but instead it's like a religious position, job. I'm not entirely sure. Next is Nora, who's based on Thor. Now, I've been trying to lump all the characters from the same fairy tale together, but for the various gods, I'm not going to bother doing that, because there's a lot of them, and we'll get derailed from Juniper so badly. I'll just bring them up as we keep going along. So yeah, Thor, Norse god of thunder. During one of Thor's adventures, he had to disguise himself as a bride named Freya to get into a party to get back his stolen hammer. And Freya is also often depicted as a Valkyrie, and Nora's last name is Valkyrie. Nora's electricity-powered semblance obviously references the god of lightning's abilities, and both of them wield hammers with kind of similar sounding names. Magenhild is just Mjolnir at home, am I right? Ren is Mulan, a story about a woman who disguised herself as a man to join the army to save her frail father from having to fight and save China. Ren wears Chinese-inspired clothing, which is the origin of the story for Mulan, and that's kind of it for Ren. I could point out his emblem being a lotus flower, which is pink, and he has a lot of pink themes in his design. And in the Disney movie, Mulan is often wearing a pink flower, but that isn't a lotus flower. That's a blossom from a magnolia tree. Don't worry, Ren is far from being the only one with a weak reference to their fairy tale inspirations. It's a shame it's one of our main characters, though. But now, let's jump to the P's in Juniper, starting with Pyrrha Nikos, whose fairy tale is Achilles, from Greek legend. In my character design short, I incorrectly said Roman, and I'm embarrassed about that. Achilles was a powerful warrior who once had to disguise himself as a red-haired woman named Pyrrha. Well, that makes it pretty on the nose, huh? In Greek mythos, when Achilles was a baby, his mother dipped him into the river Styx, and the power of the river gave him near invulnerability. However, when she held on to him, she was holding him by his heels, so that part of his body never got the magical powers from the river. So when he finally died, it was due to a wound on his heel. That's also why we call the Achilles tendon that. We named it after this legend. And also, when Pyrrha died, Cinder shot her through the heel, rendering her unable to continue fighting. Her name, Pyrrha Nikos, also seems to be referencing the idea of a Pyrrhic victory, which basically means a battle that had so much loss, death, or damage that it feels like you still lost even though you won, which is a pretty apt way of describing Pyrrha's death. The Pyrrhic part of Pyrrhic victory is alluding to Pyrrha's first name, but also her last name, Nikos, is the Greek name that translates to victory of the people. Literally, her name is Pyrrhic victory. But also, Nikos is similar to Nike, the Greek goddess of victory, the male and female versions of the same name. And Nike, famously, is also a shoe brand, which brings us all the way back around to referencing Achilles' heels. It is a nice full circle with Pyrrha, and I love it. Finally, let's tackle Oscar, and with him, we'll be diving into the many characters alluding to the Wizard of Oz. Oscar's fairy tale inspiration is Tippetarius, also known as Tip from the Wizard of Oz. If you don't recognize them, that's because they were never in the movie, they were only in the books. Tip turns out to be the Princess Ozma in disguise, who, obviously, Ozma, the original man who started the long line of reincarnation Oscar is the most recent host for, was named after. Oscar is also Ozma, just like how Tip was also Princess Ozma. Now, you might look at Oscar's life as a farmhand living with his aunt and assume he's meant to be alluding to Dorothy. That's definitely what I thought for the longest time. But actually, Tip also lived as a farmhand and was raised by a female guardian. On the topic of Dorothy, the Vacuo headmaster is actually the one referencing her, Theodore, which is the male version of the name Dorothea, which is the longer version of the name Dorothy. We don't know much about Theodore. He's only made appearances in the coffee books so far. He's wearing red gloves and silver shoes. In the actual Wizard of Oz books, Dorothy's magical shoes weren't red, they were silver. The classic movie changed it to red to better play with the newfound color technology, making them pop a lot more compared to silver. And the red gloves Theodore wears seems to be alluding to these ruby variants instead. Ozpin himself is clearly referencing Oz, the Great and Powerful, aka Ozpinhead. Raven even references that classic title.
Because Old Man Oz has a great and terrible secret.
Thanks to being a reincarnation of Ozma, that means Ozpin is one of the few people in the world who has control of real magic, technically defining him as a wizard. And just like the man behind the curtain, Ozpin is a man who is actually filled with lies and half-truths. Now, Ozpin is a good example of how some characters seem to have multiple different story illusions. Yes, everything about him being Ozpinhead is still true, but also he seems to play the role of Odin as well. Odin had two ravens, Hugin and Munin, who he magically gave the ability to speak. They would fly around and keep an eye on things for Odin and report back to him. This is not dissimilar to Oz gifting the Bronwyn twins the ability to turn into birds. While we're on the Bronwyns, we'll tackle them next. Raven seems to only be referencing Odin's ravens, but Crow doubles up on fairy tales like how Ozpin does. Not only is he one of Odin's birds, he also is referencing the Scarecrow from The Wizard of Oz. Not only with his crow-inspired name, but also his weapon of a scythe, a tool that is commonly used on fields and farms, like where you are most likely to find a scarecrow. The Scarecrow wants to get a brain, and while Crow doesn't seem to be unintelligent in any way, he does seem to be overly trusting or gullible, which could be an allusion to the idea of not thinking of things all the way through. The Scarecrow also had a hard time standing upright due to the fact he was made of straw, and when we meet Crow, he similarly is having a hard time standing, but that was due to him being drunk at the time. Next up, we've got James Ironwood, who's the Tin Man. The majority of his body has been replaced with robotic prosthetics, making his metallic body similar to the Tin Man's. The Tin Man was on the hunt for a heart. Oh, why'd I word it that way? The Tin Man wanted a heart, and Ironwood's turn to villainy could be described as being heartless. Crow even gets a cute little line in Volume 3 alluding to this.
Sometimes I'm not even sure he has a heart.
Here's a fun detail. The Tin Man is usually depicted carrying around an axe, since he was a woodcutter, a stick with a blade on the end. And in the classic movie, we see the Scarecrow is wielding a gun for protection. In RWBY, these two characters seem to have swapped the ideas of their weapons, giving Crow the blade on a stick and giving Ironwood the gun. I'm not sure if this was intentional or not, but I do think it's funny. Next is Leonardo Lionheart, referencing the Cowardly Lion. Not only does his name have lion in it twice, but he is also a lion faunus. We see he has a very meek personality, but also people constantly refer to his cowardice all throughout Volume 5. In the book, the witch tried to convince the lion to work for her, but he denied her because he actually did have courage the whole time. It was a whole thing. It was very cute. But in RWBY, he actually is working with the witch. Next, we have Glinda Goodwitch, and obviously her fairy tale is Glinda, the Good Witch of the North. Glinda is fun because she's actually seems to be the reversal of her fairy tale inspiration, personality-wise. OG Glinda is depicted as kind and welcoming, while RWBY Glinda is stern and mean. Both use wands for their abilities, but Glinda's is actually a riding crop that she wields like a wand. Her eyes might be green to reference the witch aspect of her character, because witches are more commonly associated with green, like with the Wicked Witch's skin tone. Also, Glinda's symbol is a tiara, which seems to be a reference to the fact that Glinda is usually seen wearing a crown of sorts. And speaking of witches, that leaves our Wicked Witch of the West, Salem. Salem is named after Salem, Massachusetts, the place famous for their witch trials. In the past, after humanity came back to Remnant, Salem isolated herself and even got a reputation as
The witch.
Similar to what I said about Ozpin, Salem is one of the few people who can do real magic, and that would make her a witch. In Volume 6's end credits scene, we watch her specifically creating an army of winged ape grim, which seem to be a clear reference to the Wicked Witch's army of flying monkeys. Due to being a witch, Salem also seems to be referencing other witches across other fairy tales, specifically ones associated with her subordinates. Hazel is based on Hansel, and his dead sister Gretchen was Gretel. Hansel and Gretel were captured by a witch in the woods, much like how Hazel works for the witch now. Supposedly, Salem also doubles on being both the witch who captured Rapunzel and being Rapunzel herself, being trapped in a tower by her family. But like, come on. You can't have a character reference Rapunzel and not give them super long hair. I'm not sold on this one, personally. There's one last Wizard of Oz character, but it's a bit up in the air on whether or not this one counts, and it's Neo. I believe with my whole heart that Neo's fairy tale is the porcelain doll from Wizard of Oz. Her semblance has a style like shattering glass, and gives her the ability to completely change her appearance, almost like how you could play dress up with a doll. Her semblance is even called overactive imagination, and when you play with dolls, your imagination is doing a lot of the heavy lifting. This hasn't ever been confirmed by the writers though, but god damn it, I'm sticking to this one because I like it, and there's too many things that convince me that this is how it's supposed to be. As for what we can confirm, thanks to the Roman holiday book, we know that her real name is actually Trivia, which is also one of the names of the goddess of three-way crossroads, likely alluding to Neo's three color-schemed design, pink, brown, and white, like the ice cream Neapolitan, which is just worse Spumoni, if we're being honest. The RWBY wiki lists some other ways Neo alludes to Trivia, who's also known as Hecate, but they all seem to be pretty big stretches if you ask me. However, Neo also has another character allusion, and it's the Mad Hatter from Alice in Wonderland. She dons Roman's hat after he dies, and she is clearly mad, both as in, like, mad like she's angry about it, but also once landing in the Ever After, she seems to be losing it a bit, using her souped-up new semblance to make copies of Roman to hang out with. Here, she also holds a tea party of all of the people RWBY's met who's died, in order to torment RWBY. It's the Mad Hatter's Tea Party. And now I guess it's time to tackle all the Alice in Wonderland characters. First off, the whole of the Ever After is meant to be a reference to Wonderland. It's an in-universe fairy tale called The Girl Who Fell Through the World. It's written by Lewis, named after the author of our real world, Alice in Wonderland, Lewis Carroll. Lewis was Alex's brother, and the two traveled through the Ever After. Alex, just like her fairy tale counterpart, Alice, was a defiant young girl who traveled this strange world they found themselves in. There's Little/Somewhat, who is a reference to the Dormouse. Both are mice, obviously, and both are very, very sleepy. The Red Prince references the Queen of Hearts. Both wear red, both have a habit of threatening to cut people's heads off.
And beheading people does cheer me up.
Both have control over play-themed armies. The Red Prince's is made of toy wooden soldiers, while the Queen of Hearts is made out of cards. And both challenge the story's adventurers to a game, but also cheats to try to win and throws a temper tantrum when they lose. The Curious Cat is based on the Cheshire Cat. Both have the ability to turn invisible, float, and seemingly teleport. And when the cat possesses Neo, they have a remarkably toothy grin, like how the classic animated Cheshire Cat is often shown having. The Herbalist is based on the Caterpillar, both of whom end up as butterflies by the end of the story. They both smoke out of a hookah, though what they're smoking is very importantly different. The Caterpillar famously asks,
"Who are you?"
while Herb instead asks, The Jabberwocker is inspired by The Jabberwocky, which is actually a different poem that's just also written by Lewis Carroll that made it into Through the Looking Glass and What Alice Found There. It seems like it really is just its name that it's referencing though. To be fair, the original poem is made up of a bunch of fake words in place of real adjectives. The only real description of the Jabberwock we get is the jaws that bite, the claws that catch. And the Jabberwocker definitely has claws, not so much about the biting jaws though. Not in the Ever After, but still Wonderland characters, there's Dee and Dudley, who are based on Tweedledee and Tweedledum. Aside from their names, there's not much else to talk about that's a definitive allusion to their inspiration, except for maybe the fact that Tweedledee and Dum were very annoying, and the gang of heroes also seem to be pretty annoyed with Dee and Dudley's presence. Lastly, Jean comes back to double up as the White Rabbit, alongside his steed, Juniper, who he named after his team. Jean and Juniper keep a strict schedule to watch after the paper pleasers, meaning they're always running around to stay on time. Jean even references the classic line from The Rabbit.
I'm late! I'm late!
Jean also used to wear a hoodie with a white rabbit on it, Pumpkin Pete. Alrighty, that covers Wonderland. Let's dive into the next one. Penny. Penny's fairy tale is Pinocchio. They're both technically made out of inanimate objects. Pinocchio wasn't a real boy.
I'm not a real girl.
Robots and puppets aren't too different, right? Penny's weapon also involves her controlling swords with very fine strings, reminiscent of the strings used to puppeteer a marionette. When Pinocchio lied, his nose would grow, and when Penny lies, she gets the hiccups. Penny becomes the Winter Maiden, and it is a beautiful moment where she confirms that she is a real girl. She has a soul. No inanimate object could be given the gift of being a maiden, and it's a beautiful way to allude to the ending of Pinocchio where he becomes a real boy. We now know that Penny has always been a real girl. And then they ruin it by having Ambrosius do it just the lazy way. Speaking of, Freya, the prior Winter Maiden, seems to be referencing the Blue Fairy here, being the one to give Penny her definition of real, similar to how the Blue Fairy gave Pinocchio life. However, Ciel Soleil also seems to be referencing the Blue Fairy, or more specifically the wishing star Geppetto makes a wish on that ends up becoming the Blue Fairy to make his wish come true. Ciel Soleil translates to sky sun, and the sun is just a star, technically. Her emblem, which she wears on her forehead, even seems to be depicting a shining star. However, Ambrosius could also be referencing the Blue Fairy due to his role in making her literally a person with fleshy guts instead of nuts and bolts. The writers had joked and called him Merlin Daddy before, but has since clarified that Merlin is not his fairy tale inspiration, but they didn't clarify what his inspiration is actually meant to be instead. So, 3 different people nebulously maybe being the Blue Fairy. I don't know. I mentioned Geppetto, and obviously Penny's father, Pietro, takes on that role. Both are inventors, though just like their children, their specialties would differ between woods and robotics. Pietro also has a little whale figurine in his office, likely alluding to the great whale Monstro from Pinocchio, alongside Salem's actual giant flying whale that crashes into Atlas, which is also named Monstra. Lastly, there's Roman Torchwick, whose fairy tale is Romeo Candlewick from Pinocchio. Sometimes he's also called Lampwick. I think it depends on the adaptation. Candlewick was a naughty boy who Pinocchio hung out with on Pleasure Island, usually seen smoking cigars. Lampwick ended up turning into a donkey, just like the other naughty boys, and Torchwick is a jackass. Let's finish up talking about the teachers by tackling Port and Oobleck. Peter Port is based off of Peter and the Wolf, also known as the boy who cried wolf. Both Peters are people who lie in order to get attention. Bartholomew Oobleck is based off of Dr. Seuss's book, Bartholomew and the Oobleck. That green stuff you see there, that's the Oobleck. They've reinterpreted that idea into Oobleck's green hair. Let's talk about Team Coffee next. I already discussed Fox, so let's handle Coco Adele. She seems to be named after Coco Chanel, and I 100% think it's just because they wanted a color name and picked one that is also a reference to a fashion designer, because Coco likes fashion. Unfortunately, Coco Chanel was also a Nazi sympathizer, and that's why you should should always do more than 3 seconds of research when you're deciding on your characters' names, kids. Aside from that, there doesn't actually seem to be any fairy tale inspirations for Coco. She and the rest of her team are named after desserts, but that's not really a fairy tale inspiration. Similarly, Yatsuhashi doesn't seem to have anything to work with other than being named after a Japanese treat of the same name. I'll handle all of the characters who don't seem to have any confirmed fairy tale inspirations at the very end of the video. For now, though, let's turn to Velvet Scarlatina. She's based on the Velveteen Rabbit. Not only is it obvious with her name and her rabbit faunus nature, but in the story of the Velveteen Rabbit, there was a rabbit toy who had been thrown out because it was infected with scarlet fever, and Velvet's last name, Scarlatina, seems to be referencing that. Here's an obvious one. Sun Wukong is based on Sun Wukong, though it is spelled differently. Sun Wukong is the famous character from both The Monkey King and Journey to the West, and RWBY's Sun is a monkey faunus. Sun's blonde hair might be a reference to another character based on The Monkey King, Son Goku from Dragon Ball, specifically in his Super Saiyan form, which gives him blonde hair. Sun's gunchucks are called Ruyi Bang and Jingu Bang, and they can also form together to become a staff, referencing the fact the Monkey King had a magical staff that was named Ruyi Jingu Bang. The Monkey King had the ability to make clones of himself using the strands of his own hair, and Sun's semblance makes duplicates that shine gold like his hair. The Monkey King also had the ability to see through disguises, and Sun was able to tell Blake was a faunus even when she was wearing her bow. And my personal favorite,
That'll be a regular journey to the east. Yeah, I like the sound of that.
I wish the show had more lines like this. I think they're funny. So even though in The Journey to the West, the Monkey King travels with 3 other companions, they didn't make the rest of Sun's team the other characters. So I guess we'll just talk about the rest of Team Sun anyway. Missed opportunity, jeez Louise. Neptune, obviously, is based on Neptune, the Roman god of the sea. That's also why he's afraid of the water. Get it? Because Neptune. He does the water things. He also apparently has the ability to control water with his semblance, but it's never shown to us in the show. Neptune also uses a trident, which is famously the weapon Neptune is seen using. Fun fact, Neptune's trident is named Tryhard. Scarlet is actually an interesting one. He's Peter Pan, but specifically Peter Pan and Scarlet. A sequel story where Peter Pan, after beating Captain Hook, takes over the Jolly Roger and dons an old coat from Captain Hook. Hence Scarlet's attire, which seems to take more inspiration from pirate-styled clothes rather than the classic tunic-wearing Peter Pan. Scarlet's semblance is the ability to glide short distances, and when he does this in the show, he even adopts the classic flying pose seen from Peter Pan in the Disney movie. Scarlet's weapons are named Hook and Darling, referencing Captain Hook and the Darling children from the story. While we're on Peter Pan, there's also Tok, whose fairy tale inspiration was Tick-Tock, the crocodile who has a ticking clock in its belly, who tormented Captain Hook, because actually the thing Hook was afraid of was aging, and the ticking clock was a reminder of that. Hooray, symbolism! Tok seems to be an alligator faunus, both with the scaled skin and her sharp teeth, though I'm gonna be real, I think she sharpened her teeth herself. Similar to Scarlet, she also wears clothes and uses weapons similar to the style pirates used to use. Tok's semblance allows her to become completely invulnerable for 1 minute, and she uses the stopwatch on her hip to time herself so she knows when that minute is up. This stopwatch similarly replicates the iconic ticking sound the clock inside of the crocodile makes. Next we have Sage, who is either meant to reference Aesop, the sage and famous author, or one of his famous fables, The Pilgrim and the Sword. But when someone asked Miles Luna, he said he couldn't remember which one specifically. Great job. Why bother remembering the allusions to your own characters? That's not the point of the show or anything. I'm gonna lean more towards The Pilgrim and the Sword, just because Sage's sword is huge and is named Pilgrim. You'd think the giant bird wings on his jacket, and the fact he can seemingly jump really high on his own, might be an allusion to some sort of bird-themed fairy tale. Guess not, though. Good thing no one can remember what he's based off of. But while we're on Aesop and his fables, let's talk about the team literally named after him, the Aesops. Each one is based off of one of the Aesop fables, starting with Clover, who's based on the Lucky Fisherman. He uses a fishing rod as a weapon, and not only is named and wears a four-leaf clover, which is a symbol of good luck, but even has good luck as his semblance.
My semblance is good fortune. Lucky you, huh?
Harriet is based off of the hare from the story The Tortoise and the Hare. The hare was incredibly fast, just like Harriet is with her speed semblance, and both are awfully competitive. As for their counterpart, the tortoise, Harriet references how they've passed away before we've met the Aesops in the show.
Like marrow replaced Tortuga.
Tortuga is the Spanish word for tortoise. Speaking of Marrow, he's based on The Dog and Its Reflection, a story about a dog who sees his reflection in the river and drops the bone he was carrying to try to steal the reflection's bone, losing the one he already had. Not only is Marrow a dog faunus, but his name even references the bone from the story. Marrow is that crud inside your bones. I don't know how else I can explain that. To further lean into the dog thing, Marrow's semblance, Stay, is a command used for training dogs, and his weapon is named Fetch. It's also part boomerang, which is one of the things dogs often play fetch with. Elm and Vine are based on the story The Elm and the Vine, which isn't really much of a story. It's mostly just meant to be a symbolism for marriage, which is weird because these two aren't married, I don't think. They don't mention it, so I assume so. Elm's semblance allows her to root herself into place, like the roots of an elm tree, and Vine's semblance gives him long, stretchy arms, like the long stretch of a vine. Winter also joins the Aesops, but unlike the others, she isn't based on one of Aesop's fables. Instead, Winter is based on the Ice Queen. You know, that story Frozen was supposedly also based on, but is nothing like the story at all. Honestly, Winter is no better. It seems like they just randomly picked another cold lady-related thing to be Winter's fairy tale. Get it? Because her name is Winter, and it's also cold like snow. You could make arguments that her being in charge of the Aesops or getting the maiden powers makes her akin to a queen, but let's not kid ourselves. Just like Tyrion, who is also an Aesop fable, but also barely has any real illusions to work with. Tyrion seems to be based off of The Scorpion and the Frog, a story where a scorpion promises not to sting a frog if he helps him cross the river, but ends up stinging the frog anyways because he can't fight what's in his nature. Tyrion is a scorpion faunus and does have a history of murder. On that note, let's cover the other villains too. Watts, a boring, disappointing character. He's apparently based on Watson, Sherlock's little buddy from the Sherlock Holmes series. But like, if he was evil, and that's very boring, isn't it? His first name, Arthur, is a reference to Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, the author of the Sherlock series. Both Watts and Watson are doctors, technically, and this is lame and dumb and I don't like it. There was so many fun fan theories out there that made way more sense than this boring, uninspired blandness. Some people theorized he was Jiminy Cricket. Given his long legs and coattails, he looks a bit like a cricket, and he manipulates Penny into doing bad things with his virus. Almost like an evil Jiminy Cricket who, rather than telling Pinocchio to do good things, made her bad. For a long, long time, I thought he was Victor Frankenstein, making monstrous creations with his robotic skills, and even helped create life alongside Pietro on the Penny Project. His name, Watts, could have even been a reference to kilowatt, a measurement of electricity. But nope. All down the drain. Instead, it's just Watson, but if he was mean. Lame. So lame. Mercury's based on Hermes, who is also known as Mercury. That's why that planet is named that. He's the fast one. Often depicted with winged shoes, just like Mercury's symbol, he also primarily uses wind dust with his weapon, which is located on his feet. Emerald is based on Aladdin. Both are thieves, and Roman references a song lyric from the Disney movie.
Riff raff, street rat. Or up to me, I would take you and your little street rat friend here.
Emerald's semblance makes people see things that aren't really there. This could be referring to the fact that the desert, like the ones in Arabia, often cause hallucinations, specifically the phenomenon of seeing water on the horizon. Or this could be referencing the fact that Aladdin uses one of the genie's wishes to make himself look like a prince, making people see something that's not really there. While we're on Aladdin, let's talk about Jinn, who's based on the genie in the lamp. The Relic of Knowledge is designed around a lamp, and the usual depiction of the lamp from Aladdin, it's actually the oil container that would be used to refill oil in the lamps. Jin's name is even like Jin, which is another title for a genie. She's even blue, like how the genie in the lamp is famously depicted in the Disney movie. In Aladdin, the genie would give you 3 wishes, while the Relic of Knowledge can answer 3 questions. And it is so disappointing that Emerald never interacts with Jin. Like, she sees her one time and doesn't do anything about it. Everyone was so sure that Emerald would get the last question, because it's literally like her fairy tale. But no, she doesn't interact with Jin at all, and it makes me wonder, do the writers even realize that that is the fun part about reimagining fairy tales? Taking those classic concepts and putting a fun spin on it? Seeing Jean Arc fighting Cardin Winchester is fun because it all alludes to the actual story. But if instead we watched the Cardinal of Winchester bullying, like, Goldilocks, that wouldn't make as much sense, right? Too often in RWBY, the characters who share a fairy tale with each other, disappointingly, don't get to play interesting roles with each other. Something that could be a clever spin on the things these characters are based on, instead gets ignored more often than not. Well, anyways, let's tackle Cinder. Cinder is based on Cinderella. Cinderella was given her name because her wicked stepsisters would make her sleep in the dirty fireplace, and she'd be covered in ashes and cinders. Cinder, similarly, has themes of fire, being able to superheat objects. Cinder even superheats the dirt to melt it into glass to use in battle, and no, that's technically not how it would work, but whatever, it's fun and I'm willing to forgive it. Fantasy, magic. Glass themes are big in Cinderella, specifically with her glass slippers, which Cinder also wears glass heels in volumes 1 through 3, and later covers her face with a mask made of glass in volumes 4 through 6. In volume 2, during the dance episodes, Cinder broke into the CCT to implant a virus into the school's computers. She had to race back to the dance and transform her disguise into a prom dress in order to escape the authorities. All of which happened by the stroke of midnight. A fun reversal of sorts, where Cinderella's magical gown was turning back to rags by the stroke of midnight. Cinder's weapon is even named Midnight. Too bad she never uses it, ever. It's so cool. Use it more. Cinder was trained by Rhodes, who, based on his name, seems to be referencing the story Rhodopis, a story about an enslaved Greek girl marrying the king of Egypt, which doesn't seem to actually relate to Rhodes at all, but this story is considered one of the earliest variants of Cinderella's story, though perhaps more likely he could be based on the Colossus of Rhodes, which was about a giant statue made out of various metals, which seems to be referenced with Rhodes's metal skin semblance. Some people think Rhodes alludes to the fairy godmother in Cinderella, and some people think Salem alludes to the fairy godmother, given their different methods of influencing Cinder into becoming the woman she is today. But I personally don't think either of that is true. I think Cinder is the story of Cinderella if she never had a fairy godmother. No magical fairy ever came to rescue her, so she had to take matters into her own hands. We see Cinder was either adopted or enslaved by a woman who's only known as the Madam, who had 2 daughters of her own, neither of which have names. They clearly reference the wicked stepmother and the stepsisters of Cinderella, making Cinder do tireless chores all day, just like her fairy tale counterpart. Next up on our list of villains, let's talk about Jacques Schnee. He's based on Jack Frost. We already know Schnee means snow, but also Jacques is the French variant of the English name Jack. His name literally translates to Jack Snow, aka Jack Frost.
I always find he keeps his study dreadfully cold.
Little Miss Malachite is based on the nursery rhyme Little Miss Muffet. She's even exclusively seen sitting. The first time we meet her, she's eating curds and whey, and they both have spider things going on.
You know, I used to be afraid of spiders.
Did you know that Little Miss is related to the Malachite twins? Apparently she's their mother. Melanie and Milsha don't have a specifically confirmed fairy tale, but it's a pretty common idea they're based on Snow White and Rose Red, who are 2 different characters with very similar names to Snow White and Red Riding Hood. During pre-production, Melanie and Milsha's outfits were originally going to be for Weiss and RWBY, but they decided to repurpose them and give them to the twins instead, making them, at least design-wise, also pretty similar to Snow White and Red Riding Hood, respectively. boy. Also, in their story, they spend time hanging out with a bear, just like how the twins hang out with Junior, Baby Bear. Time for the White Fang. Let's start with Sienna Khan, who's based on Shere Khan from the Jungle Book. Not only are their names similar, but Sienna is also a tiger faunus. Both of the tigers had disdain towards humans, and in the book, Shere Khan was trampled to death by a bull, and wouldn't you know it, our resident bull boy was also the cause for the death of Sienna. While we're on the Jungle Book, Gira seems to be based on Bagheera, the panther. He seems to be a panther faunus, though it's a bit hard to tell what cat specifically he is. Meanwhile, Kali might be based on Raksha, the wolf who raised Mowgli alongside her own cubs. After all, those might be wolf ears. That would explain why they're so much bigger than Blake's regular cat ears, but it is also worth noting that she shares the name Kali with the Hindu goddess. Kali is said to be a divine mother, and Kali is also a mother. Not much else to compare these two with, though. Fennec and Corsic might be a Jungle Book reference. They are potentially based on a character named Tabaki. I think I'm saying that right. A jackal who would eat the scraps from Shere Khan and the wolves. But Fennec and Corsic are clearly foxes. Those are foxes. Those are different breeds of foxes. And I guess they're kind of like jackals. There's nothing else that's really confirmed for them though, so I guess this will have to do. This next batch aren't technically confirmed either, but I think I have all three of them figured out pretty spot on. Ilya, I'm pretty sure, is based on The Mixed Up Chameleon, the children's book written by Eric Carle, who also wrote The Very Hungry Caterpillar. Ilya is a chameleon faunus. That's pretty obvious. But the point of The Mixed Up Chameleon is that he goes around trying to be like other animals he sees, before ultimately deciding he likes himself the way he is. This does remind me of how Ilya pretended to be human before revealing her true faunus nature after human girls mocked her parents' death. Next is Yuma and Trifa. Yes, they have names. He is a bat faunus and she is a spider faunus, and I am 100% sure they're meant to just be Batman and Spider-Woman. That's literally it. The writers, like DC, obviously, they needed some background characters, make them Batman and Spider-Woman. Why not? Let's jump away from villains and talk about the Happy Huntresses. Robin Hill is based on Robin Hood. Not only are their names similar, but both are stealing resources from those in a position of power to give back to the less fortunate. Robin also uses a crossbow, a play on the idea that Robin Hood was a famous archer. And her Happy Huntresses are a feminized version of Robin Hood's Merry Men. Fiona Time is based on Friar Tuck. You can tell because they have the same first letter of their names. I'm not gonna lie, the rest of the Happy Huntresses are all really bare bones like that. It's all basically just alliteration, and that's it. Joanna is Little John, because Joanna is tall, like how he was, and her name is a feminized version of the name John. May Marigold is based on Maid Marian. Again, it's just the first letters of their names. With Volume 7, you really get the feeling that the writers were completely bored and had given up on the fairy tale inspiration angle for the characters. We're at the point where it's literally just, this character has the first letter of their name the same as another character. And I find it so massively disappointing. We could have played with this a lot more. Isn't that the fun of RWBY? Wasn't that the whole point of making these characters based on fairy tales in the first place? Like, Robin Hood had perfect aim. What if Robin's semblance let her move things that were in motion so she could perfectly redirect her arrows to always hit the target? I just see constant wasted potential these days with these new characters. They don't play around with their fairy tales in fun ways anymore. Remember what I said about Pyrrha? How it all was a perfect circle with how much detail there was? What happened to that level of creativity with these characters? Well, anyways, now it's time for speed round random characters who don't fit anywhere else. Tuxin isn't based on a fairy tale specifically, but more seems to be just a reference to a classic Red vs. Blue quote.
I think it looks more like a puma.
What in Sam hell is a puma?
I think he was some sort of cat, actually.
What, like a puma?
Yeah.
On the topic of internet references, Team Funky are based on memes. Flint Cole references the Achievement Hunter meme where they kept picking up Flint and Cole while playing Minecraft and ended up coming up with a character named Flint Cole. They've done this more than once, by the way. There was also a Flint Cole in X-Ray and Vav. Flint also seems to be based on some sort of trumpet-related meme, though I'm not exactly sure which one. I think it's this one, though. Neon Cat cat is based on Nyan Cat, complete with a rainbow trail behind her, and she's a cat faunus, though her tail has never felt like a cat tail to me. Also, I really like the idea that internet memes are just new age fairy tales. I think that's funny. Cobalt and Ivory seem to be based on the "what color is that dress" meme, where people saw this dress and half of the population see it as white and gold and the other half see black and blue. Arslan seems to be based on Aslan from the story The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, because her name kind of sounds similar and her hair looks a bit like a lion's mane. And for some reason, she's the only member of her team that seems to have a clear fairy tale inspiration. Similarly, Bronze Knee is the only one of his team with a clear inspiration. He seems to be inspired by the character the Bronze Knee, who was one of the villains of the Crimson Chin in the Fairly Odd Parents. Summer Rose is named after a poem, The Last Rose of Summer. The line, "Thus kindly I scatter," is also a line from that same poem. Funny enough, in the poem, all of the Rose's companions are dead, but the reversal is true in RWBY, where the Rose is the only one of her companions who have died. Cordo is based on the old lady in the shoe. It's even specifically referenced in that one song that plays when the girls fight her mech, Big Metal Shoe. Nora even says this,
Well, your face looks like a big dumb boot.
which is also referencing the idea of living in a shoe, but like, I don't see it. We never get a good enough look at the base to really see if it looks like a boot or not. But also, her mech has large boot-shaped feet, which is once again referencing the shoe the old lady lives in. Vernal is named after the vernal equinox, which is the technical name for the first day of spring. Vernal was pretending to be the spring maiden after all. Alternatively, Amber seems to just be named after the color of leaves found in the fall, since she was the fall maiden before Cinder. Nicholas Schnee, Weiss's grandfather, is based on Santa Claus. He has a great big red cape with white fur lining, similar to the outfit Santa is usually seen wearing, and his name is referencing Saint Nick being another one of Santa's names. Saffron and Tara are likely referencing the Greek poet Sappho of Lesbos, who was famous for her attraction to women, and is where we get the word lesbian from, and also the term sapphic for relationships. Her poems primarily have been found on terracotta pottery shards, which is where Tara likely gets her name from. Adrian, however, doesn't seem to have a specific reference. The rest of Jean's sisters also don't have confirmed fairy tales yet, since they haven't been seen in the show proper, but putting all of the kids together shows that they do make the full color range of the rainbow, which is fun. Zwei is based on Ein, the corgi from Cowboy Bebop. Ein is the German word for one, and Zwei is the German word for two. Although in Cowboy Bebop, Ein is actually just short for Einstein. Finally, the god of light and the god of dark seem to be referencing the brothers Grimm. The Grimm brothers were the ones who famously found all these various fairy tales from around Europe and put them into a singular collection. And this is where the basis for the majority of our fairy tales come from. The Grimm are also named after these brothers. So on that note, we've covered all the people in the show with fairy tale inspirations, but now we've got to tackle the Grimm. First, let's do the apathy, because of all the Grimm, it's the one with the most amount of detail in its design. The monster itself was inspired by a picture of this horrifying scarecrow Miles had seen on Reddit, while also taking inspiration from the Re-Deads in the Zelda franchise, hence that screaming thing they do. But the apathy mini-plot, along with the Bartleby estate, is actually based on the short story Bartleby the Scrivener. A scrivener is a person who, back in the day before we had technology to handle all this stuff, was the person who would write down or make important copies of legal documents. In the story, Bartleby is hired as a scrivener, and while he initially seems to be doing a great job, he eventually slows down and then stops working altogether, always saying, "I would prefer not to." Eventually, it's discovered he's been living in the office but isn't doing any of the work and ends up getting arrested for vagrancy. When his boss goes to check in on him in jail, he discovers that Bartleby has died of starvation even though he was being given food, because Bartleby said he would prefer not to. Bartleby is not only the name of the farmer who captured the apathy in RWBY, but his "I'd rather not" mentality has been turned into the apathy's ability to make people stop caring, even if it leads to their death. I really love it when RWBY goes all out with reimagining a story like this. It's so good, and it's why I love the apathy. Geists are inspired by a typical ghost story, specifically the possession types of haunting. Geist is even the German word for ghost. It's said that some ghosts, though usually it's presumed to be a demon, can possess the bodies of inanimate objects. Some famous ones include Annabelle, which there have been several very terrible movies based off of. There's also Robert the Doll, who I hate a lot. Geists, similarly, also possess inanimate objects, though usually when they do it, they gather together many various items to create a larger body, rather than possessing a humanoid-shaped item like a doll. The big exception being the giant suit of armor Weiss fights in her trailer, which is supposedly a Geist possessing the full suit of armor. Okay, so the Knuckleavi. According to the wiki, it's actually two different Grimm that's been fused together, an unnamed horse Grimm, and then this part that's called the Imp Grimm, but we've never seen either of these Grimm outside of the one Knuckleavi we've seen, so I don't really think it matters. As for the actual Knuckleavi, it's part of a category of Grimm I like to call clearly just based on a mythical creature, nearly one-to-one. The Knuckleavi is a demon from Orcadian folklore. Orkney is the Northern Isles of Scotland. There's many different iterations for what it looks like, but the consensus is that it is a sea creature that's wandered onto land. Just like we see in RWBY, it was described as a man's torso being attached to a horse's body, with long arms that could reach the ground. Unlike RWBY, however, traditional Knuckleavi had fins, tying it back to that water thing. It's also described as having toxic-like breath that you could visibly see, especially coming from the horse's mouth, which we even see a bit of that when we first get a good look at the Knuckleavi in Volume 4's finale. Other Grimm in this category include the Griffin, which is based on traditional griffins, creatures that are a mix of an eagle and a lion. Manticores, which traditionally is described as having the head of a human. Why did you draw him like that? Eyes going in different directions? What the hell? This is the one on Wikipedia, by the way. This is the go-to image of a manticore. But RWBY's manticore seems to take more inspiration from other video game-styled manticores who lean more into the lion aspects and have added wings, though usually manticore wings are described as being dragon-like and RWBY's seem to be bird-like. And then there's the bigger version, the Sphinx, which, even though it's called the Sphinx, it actually more closely resembles a chimera. Sphinxes typically just had the head of a human and the body of a lion. Sometimes they're described as having wings, which definitely fits the manticore's traditional description too, but the snake tail is something that really is only seen with a chimera, though the whole creature is lacking the goat head, which is also seen on a chimera, though it is worth noting that manticore are sometimes described as having the tail of a snake, but that's meant to be like the tail part of the snake. So the Sphinx's snake head might just be a play on that idea. The wyvern, which, just like his namesake, is a classification of dragon that have two arm-like wings and two hind legs. The sea Fei Long references the traditional Chinese-style dragons. Fei Long even translates to the Chinese word flying dragon. Eastern dragons are more commonly associated with water, hence the fact this one lives in the ocean. Though Eastern dragons don't typically have wings, like how the sea Fei Long has, which could have just been added for style points, or it could be a reference to Western dragons, who do generally have wings. Leviathan is named after a traditional sea monster of the same name, and also it's the biblical beast that represents the deadly sin, envy. But appearance-wise, RWBY's Leviathan seems to just actually be based on Godzilla. Its general body shape, back spikes, and laser breath make that pretty obvious, though it is worth noting the biblical version of Leviathan is described as being crocodile-like, and this Leviathan has a crocodile-shaped head, which is not seen on Godzilla. Ravagers are based on the Mayan bat god Kamazats. We haven't seen much of the Ravager in the show yet, so there might be more to it that we will eventually allude to more elements of the Kamazats. For now though, it's just a cool inspiration for a bat-like beast. The King Taijutsu is inspired by the concept of yin and yang, the symbol for Taoism. It seems to just be based off of its balanced color palette though. There is is a Greek myth of a two-headed snake called the Amphisbaena, but I don't think the King Taijitu is actually taking inspiration from it, especially since it's usually depicted with like some sort of bird body between the two snake heads. Then there's a lot of Grimm that, just like the King Taijitu, isn't really based on anything appearance-wise, but does have a cool naming convention for it. Sulphurfish, for example, is just a cool name for a creature that looks a lot like silverfish. But rather than silver, it's sulfur, because Grimm don't look silver. Nevermore are named after Edgar Allan Poe's story, The Raven, where the famous raven in question continually said the phrase nevermore. It was about, like, grieving and stuff. It's just a cool name for a bird monster. Sentinels and the Centaur uses the name centipede and then combines it with sentinel, like the guard or watchman, and centaur, respectively. The sentinels I get, they all popped out of the ground at once, almost like they were lying in wait. Centaur, I'm gonna be honest, I don't see it. Apparently a lot of Atlas Grimm were inspired by prehistoric monsters, and these two are also inspired by prehistoric millipedes, who would grow to be about 2.5 meters long, which is my own personal nightmare. Other prehistoric Atlas Grimm include Saber, based on saber-toothed tigers, only it's spelled wrong, because in RWBY, if there's a Y in your name, that makes it fantasy. Similarly, there's also Pteryx, which takes inspiration from a pterosaur and some sort of raptor. Then, not native to Atlas, but named similarly, are Goliaths and Megaliaths, based on elephants and mammoths, named after Goliath, like David and the Goliath, the story of a man beating a giant enemy. From what I can tell, Deathstalkers aren't based on anything specific. They are named after a real species of scorpion though, which is pretty cool. If I had to guess, if there was a fairy tale idea for Deathstalkers, it was likely the same as Tyrion's story, the scorpion and the frog, but they also might have just wanted a scorpion enemy because scorpions are cool, which I think was the case for the Borbatusk as well. I think they wanted a pig enemy, and it doesn't have any defining features that makes it apparently inspired by any fairy tale in particular though. If I had to guess, maybe the Three Little Pigs? After all, the first time we see a Borbatusk is in Port's class, and his story, The Boy Who Cried Wolf, and the Three Little Pigs also had to deal with a wolf, but it's a stretch, honestly. Another one like this is Lancers and Queen Lancers. They seem to just be big bees, because why not? There is a fairy tale called The Queen Bee, but if that did play any part in inspiring the Lancers, it was just the idea of bees in general. The actual fairy tale involves 3 brothers. The youngest befriends some ants, ducks, and bees. Clearly, they just wanted a bee enemy. The unnamed Beetle Grimm also have no specific fairy tale inspirations, from what I can tell. And you know what? I found this out while researching this video. This whole time, the symbol that appears on Cinder's back after the Beetle Grimm sucks up the maiden power out of Amber, that's Cinder's character symbol. It's 2 glass slippers, soul to soul. Why did this symbol appear here? I assume it was the beetle, but why? Why was it in a glove? This is such a weirdly specific Grimm that you would think would have a really specific fairy tale reference, but no, it doesn't. Next is the creep, which RWBY have said it was meant to not look like any animal in particular, though they are kind of based off of terror birds, but I can't help but feel like this might have been inspired by the Minecraft creeper to some degree. That's not confirmed though, that's just my headcanon. It's just like the lack of arms and the big head. Maybe it's just me, but that's what I've always thought of. And for the last Grimm, we have the Seer Grimm, one of my personal favorites, because they're based on the idea of a crystal ball, playing into the magical themes of Salem being a witch, something the Wicked Witch even heavily uses in The Wizard of Oz. Making her crystal ball a living creature is such a cool idea, I love it. And then making it a jellyfish, which are already weird and creepy, it's so smart. So, that was all the Grimm, and all the characters who have known fairy tale inspirations. But not every character has been confirmed to be inspired by anything in particular, and nothing about their designs or personality hints towards anything in particular either. So here's all the rest of the characters who I haven't mentioned yet, who don't have confirmations as to what their fairy tale inspirations is. And anything I'd have to guess would just be wild speculation. The White Fang Lieutenant. He's just a White Fang grunt. let's be honest. 3/4 of Team Auburn and Team Bronze, and then all of Team Indigo. Tai Yang doesn't have a confirmed fairy tale, and that is so confusing to me. Like, Lee and An also don't have fairy tales, but that makes sense. They were only in one scene and died instantly. Tai is two of our main characters' still living father. And like, if a character like Talk, who also was only in one scene before dying instantly, can have such a strong fairy tale with a bunch of allusions to that original idea, why can't Tai? Why couldn't Lee and An, you know? Personally, I like to think he's based on King Midas, who was gifted the ability to turn whatever he touches into gold. And that would be where Yang gets her golden locks. On the RWBY wiki, it says Jinxie might be based on the idea of a Japanese raccoon dog, but no, Jinxie is a raccoon, and raccoon dogs aren't. I know that's what they're called, but they aren't actually raccoons. They're tanukis. It's a different thing. Nothing about Jinxie seems similar to a tanuki, not even color palette wise or style wise, and even if it was, I don't think there's anything else going on here. The blacksmith also doesn't have a confirmed fairy tale, which I also find fascinating. Everyone else in the Ever After was an obvious one-to-one with their Wonderland counterpart. So the blacksmith being this unknown in the middle of it adds to their mystery and the godlike feeling of this character. Obviously, random background characters aren't going to have fairy tale illusions, like the shopkeep. Henry Marigold, May's cousin, doesn't have a specific fairy tale. Sleet and Camilla, the other two council members, don't have anything going on either. And last, there's Whitley. Just like Tai Yang, this is so weird to me. It's weird that Willow and Whitley don't seem to have any real inspirations for their designs outside of just being Weiss-themed. You know, you'd think out of everyone, the main character's direct family members would have been more thoroughly thought out, especially when looking at the ones who do have fairy tale inspirations, they really go all out with their ideas. But not Whitley. Poor Whitley. So that was it. That was all the fairy tale inspirations for all the characters currently in the show proper. I really hope I didn't forget about anybody. I hope you had fun. I hope you learned something cool and interesting. I know I did. And once again, if you think I missed something, let me know in the comments below. I would love to see it. Shout out to my $10 patrons. You're all amazing. Andrew, Valhalla Knight, Chamomile, Classy Critic, Genital War Thunder, Jake, Amber, Scaring Crows, Not All That Evil, Holly, Messiah, Jacob, Ben's Sketchbook, Rain, Trash, Wild Pilot, Josh, Twisty, Juan, Bunkin Duncan, Hoodie Angel, Ranger, Sean, Primaroon, Overhypen, Lavaros, Knight, Plague, Tyrene, Thanos, Pandemonium, Peter, Aguirre, Shahid, Eden, The Eliza, Doki Pokey, Moon of Blues, Spencer, Bargus Blue, Cage the Mage, Zappy, Wolfgang, Dima, Philip, and Mr. Mailman. Thank you so much for watching this video. It was a crazy big one. I did not think it was going to be this long. I knew it was going to be long, but this was way longer than I thought. What's your favorite fairy tale inspiration from the show? And which fairy tales would you like to see get reimagined in the show that haven't shown up yet? Any and all thoughts and opinions, leave them in the comments below. You listen to me babble on for forever. Now it's your turn, and I'll just see you in the next one. Thanks for watching the whole thing all the way through. You're cool. I appreciate you. I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.